This week, Aaron Painter from Nametag is with us to discuss addressing employment scans and deepfakes. Then John Dwyer from Binary Defense joins us for a bit of storytelling where he will regale us with lessons learned from an APT attack he assisted with on the defense side. He wasn't helping the APT. Finally, in the enterprise security news, SemGrip raises a lot of money, CYE acquires Solvo, Sophos completes the SecureWorks acquisition, SailPoint prepares for IPO, summarizing the 2024 cybersecurity market, lawyers that specialize in keeping breach details secret, scientists torture AI, use DeepSeek, go to jail, make sure to offboard your S3 buckets, and you can extinguish fires with Base. All that and more in this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Imagine a world where every threat, ransomware, supply chain attacks, zero-day exploits is stopped before it can even begin. ThreatLocker makes that world a reality with a zero-trust approach to cybersecurity. By giving you granular control and every executable in your environment, ThreatLocker protects your business around the clock. No more guessing, no more gaps. Just rock-solid protection that keeps your operations running smoothly and your data secure. Discover how ThreatLocker's least privilege approach can safeguard your organization against known and unknown threats. Take the first step towards total peace of mind by visiting securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker today. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Chopsticks Day. This is episode 393, recorded on Thursday, February 5th, 2025. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Admiral of ASPM, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler-Santullo. How you doing, Katie?
I am well. There's something poetic about it being episode 393 on Thursday the 6th.
Is there?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, all multiples of 3. Also joining us is the Dean of Data Scientists, the Knight of Neurodiversity, the Watcher of Data Center Waste, Jackie McGuire. How are you doing, Jackie?
I'm doing well. It's been a hectic week of parent-teacher conferences and juggling several jobs, but this is always one of the highlights of my week, so I'm happy to be here.
Parent-teacher conferences were not my favorite. I had neurodivergent children, so it was fun.
They always start with, they're so, she is very smart, but no, my kids are all brilliant.
Yeah, always a but. Also joining us is the connoisseur of cloud security, our single origin co-host and resident coffee sommelier, Ayman Elsawa. How are you, Ayman?
Howdy, Adrian. How you doing?
I always feel like I'm saying your name different every episode. I'm like, did I say Ayman last time? Am I saying Ayman? Why am I saying that?
Yeah, today
Ayman.
It's new. Yeah, maybe it's the weather.
So yeah, I'm having a rough day today. I started back personal training, and it's been like a year since I started my own thing. I didn't have enough money to pay a personal trainer, and I finally got to a point where I feel comfortable enough financially to do so. And he decided to start me off with this new thing he was trying called blood flow restriction training.
Oh,
and like supposed to, you put pressurized cuffs on your arms and legs, and it's supposed to 30 minutes of workout is supposed to feel like 90. I can't lift my arms over my head. It took me probably 5 to 10 minutes to tie my hair back today, and that's why it's not down; it's back because I can't reach.
You can't undo
it.
Water, amino
that's
acids.
As far as I can go.
Water, amino acids, and a lot of protein. Just
yep.
Gulp down
protein
that
shake, Gatorade.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I spent Saturday at a trampoline park, so this is actually the first day I can run up the stairs in my house since the weekend.
I bet you had fun though.
I really did. It's the first time I've actually played at one of them. I found out I can't do a trapeze. So but yeah, it was awesome.
All right, let's get going here. I forgot to check and see if we had some announcements today. I would think we would have the RSA announcement. I don't see that. I know you can save $100 on RSA. We do have a code somewhere. I'll grab that for the next segment. I don't have that at hand right now. But yeah, let's jump into the first interview here. Today's topic is the groundbreaking technology addressing employment scans and deepfakes. I'm saying, it sounds like I'm saying scans, but I'm saying scams. I think my brain tells me I'm saying scams. We're excited to have Aaron Painter, CEO at Nametag, with us today. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks, folks. It's an honor to be here, and it's an even more fun crew than I realized. So this is going to be a great half hour.
Yeah, it is a fun crew, and we're going to have some questions for you. No pressure, but yeah, kind of excited to talk about this. I was telling you in our prep call, we kind of had a debate on the show about whether or not identity verification, anti-fraud, some of these things that are kind of, I've always thought of them as adjacent to cybersecurity. Like I've never heard of identity as adjacent. I always thought identity was in it, and then last year I hear like identity security is the new thing and we're combining security and identity people. I was like, what? Those were separate? When were those separate? So, I'm kind of catching up here to like how the rest of the industry views this kind of stuff. But yeah, we decided to include identity verification because it is pretty important to cybersecurity. And I'm kind of curious, like, are your buyers mostly IT or is it cybersecurity? How do you view it from your perspective here?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's definitely a transition going on in a lot of organizations. I think the rise of identity-related attacks, particularly over the last 18 to 24 months, sadly, companies like MGM, no fault of their own necessarily, but kind of being front and center in the news with an identity-related attack, and then that just reverberating through so many other companies in the last year and a half, has brought identity to the center where people now see it as fundamental to security. And so a lot of orgs are beginning to evolve, similarly with privacy, similar with some cases with AI regulation, kind of coming under the same hat. So I'd say, yes, most of our customers today are sort of CISO security leaders, and then interfacing with their colleagues in IT, and increasingly even with HR.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's, I think these are pretty familiar issues. Most of the issues that you cover here, the only one I think is kind of new here. Well, let me go over the common ones people would expect. So social engineering, pretexting, help desk folks, trying to reset accounts. Say you've got the password to an account, but you need the MFA. So you call up the help desk, you pretend to be the employee, and you get that MFA reset so that you can get past that hurdle and log in. And then, yeah, just you do some employee self-service stuff. But the thing I think is, a little bit I haven't been tracking as much as employment fraud, and I think hit all our news feeds back when KnowBe4 had a North Korean actor join their company, and they discovered it shortly after that employee successfully onboarded. But they did successfully onboard. Which was really interesting. And I think some of us who weren't specifically following APT, which North Korea is very different from all the other APTs in terms of their goals and their TTPs, we're a little bit surprised by that was a thing going on now. So maybe tell us a little bit about that. Like what's the goal here? Is it just North Korea we're seeing, or is it other people doing this as well? Like what's the goal in onboarding, faking your way into a company?
The rise of a few things have really come together. I think partly the concept of remote work, and that's certainly accelerating post the pandemic, where you didn't necessarily see your workers, you didn't necessarily onboard them the same way that you might have before. And then the rise of new Gen AI tools and the ability to create deep fakes, be they voice or audio or video, they've kind of come together to create this little bit of a perfect storm. And as is common in the case in security, they're not necessarily technological things, right? They're sort of, these bad actors are using new tools to exploit kind of the vulnerabilities in just the processes or the systems that existed. So when you think about the rise of MFA, to come a little bit earlier, most companies have added MFA to their workforce accounts for their employees, increasingly for their customer accounts. But when they did that, the forgot my password button went away. We learned this first from actually a really brilliant CISO, a guy called Eric Richard at HubSpot. And he said, at HubSpot, we added MFA to our customer accounts because we believe in it. But as a result, we had to kind of take away the forgot my password button, which meant when someone got locked out because they upgraded their phone or something went wrong with an authenticator app, it became a call to the help desk. And then the poor help desk has to sort of, this well-intentioned person has to suss out as an identity investigator, are you really the person who's calling? Are you the rightful account owner? Should I reset this access? And so that's kind of, for us at least, led to this solution. Well, let's equip help desks with sort of better tools. And then it became, again, actually partly with HubSpot's guidance, well, what if we brought back kind of an I'm locked out button and presented users with two choices? One that said contact support and takes 48 to 72 hours, and one that says, let's do this automated and get right back in. And that led to sort of self-service functionality we brought to the market for both workforce and customer accounts, particularly for employees. You don't want to call the help desk if you're locked out. The ability to go to a self-service portal, verify yourself, and then, in our case, we reach into Okta, Duo, Entra, and perform the reset. That became very high value, better employee experience, a whole bunch of things. But what we're starting to see then, those were exploits kind of on the system, not on authentication, not on MFA. It was really social engineering and the ability to social engineer, let's say, help desk rep. The same process, funny enough, has a vulnerability when you think about hiring. Because today, HR might go through a process, there's talent acquisition and interviewing, and hopefully things go well and you find the right candidate. And
virtual
you make an
interviewing,
offer.
Right? Like we don't see people in person anymore.
We don't. And so actually interviewing is its own set of risks. But there's an open discussion actually is when you want to start to inject in the process greater confidence. But at the very least, it wants to be when you bring them into your environment. And today, even companies that say, hey, we're going to have background checks. Okay, that's really valuable. But 95% of background check providers, with very few exceptions, they operate with social security numbers. So if you're impersonating someone and you have a social security number, you can pass a background check, but that doesn't mean that's actually the person who's applying for the job or about to get the job. And so the background check process isn't that useful. And then it becomes maybe an I-9 process on day 3 or 5, let's say if they're working in the US, they have a right to work. But HR has basically made the hire and then shifts it to IT and says, okay, now onboard and issue credentials to this new person. And the default experience today, right, is IT sends a personal Gmail address, a link to set up their account and configure their MFA and set a password. And it turns out that's really risky because you don't necessarily know who you hired in that process, that you're now relying on, IT to provision and give access to the environment. And so it's kind of a breakdown in process because the tools that were there, the steps that were there weren't really robust enough. And that's what's led to this huge surge in people taking advantage of it. And to your question, it is North Koreans. For a while, I used to say kind of in quotes, it might be other people. There are certainly other people taking advantage. There are North Koreans not stationed in North Korea. They often have people that work with them, maybe in the US, but they're applying for jobs. Their camera's on, their camera's not on. They're using a deepfake emulator in the video interview, maybe. They get the job. The goal is to get on payroll. Some cases they, might do bad things. They might try and extract code. They might try and deposit ransomware. But the great majority that we've seen is people at payroll fraud. They want to stay on payroll as long as they can without being detected and then translate those earnings, call it back to the North Korean state.
It occurs to me, we didn't check to see if you were the real Aaron Painter before starting this podcast.
Vice versa, ditto.
Yeah, I imagine background checks are going to get increasingly less relevant as well. So this week, one of the interesting things that happened is the current head of the Treasury and acting head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau froze all rulemaking, and they were supposed to pass a rule, I think March 3rd, that things like social security numbers couldn't be sold by data brokers, that data brokers would be managed more like credit bureaus. And nobody's really sure whether that's going to go through now because rulemaking's frozen. So social security numbers are definitely not going to be something you can use any longer. I mean, they haven't been for a while, but I imagine this problem is going to get a lot worse if that rule is not passed and you can actually buy those things from data brokers.
And I feel like all socials have all been leaked and stolen, and they're long gone, right? Like you can probably find my social security number out there. I would be surprised if you couldn't. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So I mean, how do you see this evolving into the future, and kind of where are you guys looking to go? Ideally, what does the ideal setup look like with hiring and onboarding to protect the process and ensure that you know who you've hired?
Yeah, it's funny. As a company, we've been around about 5 years, and everything that we've learned has been truly from listening to customers. And it sounds a little bit cliched. I wrote a book about this in 2017, so it's an area I'm really passionate about. But the ability to let customers sort of guide you on where they see the challenges turns out to be very real time. And if you're responsive and you kind of earn that trust, and we feel like we have it in most of our customer environments, they sort of, hey, I kind of had this problem. Could I use this here? Could I use it there? And so I think it was when our first customers said, hey, I was using Nametag, let's say for recovery when people were locked out, I was using it at the help desk. But can I show you a demo? I just used it to sort of wrap Workday. I'm using it now, let's say, before I add someone to Workday or my enterprise, HR information system, to say, let me verify who it is. Let me get some legal data from the system, from someone's government issued ID, import that into Workday. Or on the other end, okay, we've done it at Workday, but now we're going to do it as they come out of Workday before we take them over to IT provisioning. People are finding different parts of their HR processes and sort of inserting this concept of secure identity verification into it. And a lot of the gaps existed, again, because they're disparate systems. You might have an enterprise directory. Let's say you run an Active Directory, but you might also have an Okta universal directory. You might have different information in Workday. You've got people that are candidates, but then they become employees, and they were contractors and then employees. And so it's this in between of all these enterprise systems and apps that you actually end up not knowing necessarily who the human is behind the account. And that could be one or multiple accounts. And so we focus on, and where I really see things going, are this needing to understand who the human is behind the screen in kind of a consistent way at these high risk moments, so you can then lean on and trust your enterprise directories and apps that kind of rely on that as a source of truth.
Yeah, and we kind of teased it in the title of this segment that there was this breakthrough technology, this groundbreaking technology, and yeah, it turns out to be a smartphone, right? Like that's it. That's the the groundbreaking technology to do face verification, which is looks like it's becoming kind of the standard for doing this kind of identity verification, right?
You're spot on. And we usually thought we were very early in this, and we're still sort of the leaders in this. We created this space. And the concept was, for a long time, people have done this: scan your ID and take a selfie. And it's existed for financial transactions. You think of it called know your customer, or KYC. Let's say when you're opening a new bank account. The issue is it's always existed in a web browser, desktop or mobile. It's always been browser based. So we said, all right, what if we just reinvent the same thing that's happening in a web browser, but do it on a mobile phone, exclusively on a mobile phone? And it turns out if you operate with the mobile technology behind you, you have an incredible leg up on the security perspective of doing an identity verification flow. And it was kind of that insight that opened up then all these new use cases. And I thought it was really innovative for a while. I was like, oh, this is so obvious. We've taken it identity verification, into mobile, and it's more secure. And then a few weeks ago, I was actually speaking with this reporter, and he'd been at it for a while. And he said, I was really into check fraud for a long time. And I was following the Catch Me If You Can, and I'm forgetting the guy's name.
As a reporter, not as a hobby, right?
As a reporter. And, there's the lead guy there and all about check fraud and how it worked. And it sort of dawned on me. It's, people wrote checks, and you would sign them, and they'd be sent to the banks. And there were government administrators, there were banks that would look at the signature and is the paper real, and do this physical verification. And then it moved to what we can do now, which is mobile check deposits. But funny enough, there was never an upload a photo of this check to the web browser. It went from paper to mobile apps. Right. And in the mobile banking apps, when they're exclusively on mobile, benefiting from the cryptography of the device and the advanced telemetry and the camera, all the great things on mobile, it turns out that created a safe way to take that check and do a digital deposit. And that's what we've done with identity verification. We've literally taken that same set of intelligence and said, let's rely on things like cryptographic attestation. And what that means is that deep fakes today are used, it doesn't matter how they're created, there's great software to make them, but they're really used in one of two ways. One is what's known as an injection attack. And that is when you change sort of the source or the feed of how the evidence is being captured. The simplest way to think of an injection attack is in Zoom or Teams. The ability to change your camera or microphone, you can actually change it to a piece of software that's creating a real-time deep fake. There might be beneficial reasons to do that. It's also very easy for fraudsters to do that. Teams and Zoom were created to prevent against injection attacks. Turns out browser-based experiences weren't either. Mobile experience, however, can make sure that the evidence being collected is coming from the camera on the device, and so someone's not injecting a deep fake. So that became a huge way to prevent, not even assess deep fakes. It's not about AI saying, does this look like a deep fake? You're just preventing the deep fake from being used. And then the second way people often use deep fakes are in these what's called a presentation attack. And that's when you present fake information to the camera. So you know it's the right camera, but let's say you're Mission Impossible style and you're wearing a 3D printed mask, or you hold up another phone, where you have a video of someone or a photo of someone. And that's when you get to rely then on all the other great sensors and things on the mobile device, like the 3D depth map camera that powers Face ID. Turns out Face ID can get a three-dimensional image to know, is this an image of someone that's flat or is it a three-dimensional image? And it just goes on from there. All the advanced toys in mobile phones let us do a really sophisticated security assessment to make sure that you know someone is human and that you know that they're the human you're intending when you're doing one of these identity verification experiences. And it was that insight that's allowed us to now kind of open up all these other use cases.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes sense. And, I imagine, as you presented earlier, you can still do the 24 to 48 hours workflow, which, all this stuff you find, employees that maybe don't want to use smartphones, they want to use their personal phone. I wonder in the workflow for an employee joining the company, I don't know if that's one of the use cases where you use this, how do you use the mobile phone for somebody who's not an employee yet, who hasn't been onboarded yet? Is that a workflow that you guys can handle?
Yeah, interestingly, we don't need mobile device trust from the sense of, have we seen this device before? We need mobile device trust to say, is it a non-jailbroken device? Is it operating well? But we don't need someone to have actually enrolled that phone previously. There's no pre-enrollment required. And so we benefit from the mobile phone for the security attributes, but we don't need it to be a pre-enrolled, like mobile to managed device. So it works kind of beautifully for a new hire or someone who's locked out, because same scenario. If you're locked out of your account, you typically don't have access to your device isn't functioning properly. And so you need to be able to rely on sort of a fresh device. You just want to make sure that it's a device that's actually functioning properly.
But you're comparing it against something you already have, right? It's like the goal isn't just, is this a human face or is somebody trying to fake something?
That's right.
There's something it's comparing against, right?
Yes. So our flow requires government issued ID and then a selfie. Same as you've always done in a KYC. So we're able to compare those two things. We just get them in a much more rich and secure way. And then one of the neat things is if you've seen them before, seen the same person before, then there's actually an element of express re-verification. So should you come back again on the same device, you don't need to scan your ID again. You can just take a selfie. And that became one of several patents to sort of compare that selfie to the earlier selfie back to the government issued ID. So it's the same level of assurance, but yet it's an even lower friction experience for a user. And then should they get a new device, again, let's say they're locked out or a new hire, great. That time they just need to scan their ID and do the selfie. But you're kind of onto something, which there's part of it is verifying who is this person and does it match the name and other things. But then once you've verified that, you've got the whole other side of it, which is what's on someone's government issued ID might not be the same thing as what's in the enterprise directory. And we call that problem binding. You actually have to find a way to draw a connection between those two things. And so the variety of ways we work with companies on to sort of make that binding connection so that oh gosh, this name in the directory is likely this person. You might be Alice Smith, for example, a common name. There could be a lot of Alice Smiths in the world. You might have multiple in your environment. But just because we verified this is actually someone named Alice Smith who looks like this, that doesn't mean that's the same Alice Smith that works in your company that's trying to recover this account. Same thing with multicultural names or a name where someone might go by something very different than what their legal name might be. A whole bunch of scenarios like that. And so there's verifying the person against the ID, but then there's also connecting that back into what's in an enterprise directory, which is why doing this from the moment of hire creates an even more kind of seamless flow.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So let me ask you, how prevalent is this? I mean, I heard an episode on Darknet Diaries, episode 133, that actually cataloged a person being faked. He was an engineer and someone else was using his name to apply for another job. And what was fascinating is I think there's a lot of HR folks out there that are unaware of this. They're getting a lot of spammy applicants to jobs. And in fact, I help companies when I'm helping companies. A lot of times, employees are saying, "Hey, there's all these fake, Acme Corp employees listed on LinkedIn, but they're not there." So, how prevalent is this? What are you seeing out there?
It's wild. The FBI actually has been very vocal on this, the volume of reports, and actually because they've been involved in so many of the cases that we're seeing, mainly because we work with larger enterprises, larger brands, and they're quick to involve the FBI, and the FBI has actually been very helpful in tracking down some of these and shutting down some of these rings. But it is, I do not speak with a CISO or even a CEO or an HR leader of a Fortune 500 company today who does not have personal stories to tell me about how this happened. Oh my gosh, let me tell you. And I've had 3 this morning. It's the afternoon. I've had 3 meetings like that already today of big companies where people have shared those stories. And any little breach is incredibly concerning. And so, let alone when you have multiple of them. And often then sometimes companies have gone into audits and they say, okay, now we're really nervous. Let's try and find more of these. Let's find similar behavior patterns. And they're like, oh my goodness, I've had people here for days, weeks, months, years in my environment. And then you go to the hiring platforms, the job platforms. It's staggering the volume of fake candidates. We see it ourselves as a company. I mean, the volume of candidates we get on with now, and we're pretty good at detecting this stuff. And still, we very quickly realize this isn't the person that we're interviewing. Maybe they have a Latin sounding name and they look Asian. Totally possible. But then when you say, where do you live? And they, I had one the other day personally. I said, well, they said, I'm in Seattle. I said, oh, great. I'm in Seattle too. And I said, where in Seattle are you? And they said, Washington State. I said, yeah, that's great. Like what part of town? And they said, West Coast. I said, okay, alrighty. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
There's often, there's telltale signs, there's shifty eyes looking at, ChatGPT or the equivalent of real-time coaches that are providing Gen AI feedback on how to coach their interview conversations. There's a whole range of how I'm sick today. A lot of ways people are deceiving the interview process.
For this? Like, is this kind of by the seat of your pants? Like everybody's coming up with their own questions, like what part of town or something like that? Or are there more formal best practices for what questions to ask to spot, a suspicious case?
I think a lot of them today are anecdotal. And I think if we fast forward to the trends that we're seeing today, we have to at least secure hiring, right? We have to be, before you're making that offer, before you're issuing credentials. Let's start there. It's in the realm of IT. Before you issue credentials to your environment, you need to do a secure form of identity verification. Us or find another one, doesn't matter. Or have them come in person or do something to make sure that you're letting people into your environment with the level of confidence. That's just inevitable, and we have to close that loophole. You fast forward a few more years, though, I think dating sites or social media sites, which funny is where we started. We thought, the fact that people go on dating sites and register with their social media login was kind of nonsense. You're going to build trust with someone. Hopefully it goes well when you meet in person. And people have to say, my pick your relative is nervous for me. Do you mind texting me a copy of your ID just so I know who I'm meeting? Those platforms, unfortunately, don't do a great job of building trust. And we certainly have that problem, it turns out, with interviews and hiring platforms. They need to do a better job of verifying not only who the candidates are, but actually increasingly even who the recruiters are, because people are, being fake recruiters as a way to trick candidates into interview processes.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Wow.
So the market on this is fraudsters are taking advantage of it, like they all have been on this recovery and the help desk angle, because it's just so exposed. The MFA providers have built great technology around phishing resistant MFA, but the exposure point isn't in that technology. The exposure point is when you're onboarding those users or when those users are locked out. And it's just been a gap in the portfolio of these platforms. And that's where we found we have a great way to apply this identity verification technology we created just to sort of shut those down out of the box. And then what we've learned is really the next frontier is in stopping that at the point of hiring and onboarding in particular.
Do you think that some of the larger companies that you work with will be having their vendors utilize similar technology? Because it's one of the gaps that I see with even Fortune 50 companies is that even if they're doing a great job on their own security, there's this secondary, tertiary layer of risk with vendors. So is it best practice, do you think, that large companies should also be requiring identity verification of anybody who works as a vendor for them?
It's a great question. I think one of the best ways today is anyone you're issuing credentials to should be your starting point. I think interestingly, in the world of digital transformation, this is one of the sticky points because a lot of the outsourcing firms, let's say that provide call center or help desk or support services, those companies are in the business of lengthy, expensive support tickets. So the ability to automate around that and them not need to call support isn't necessarily in their interest. But yet those are also some of the companies that are dealing with the breaches that are leading into corporate environments. So we're seeing the resistance there because of just the change, but companies themselves can certainly institute better safeguards.
Well, great stuff, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining Enterprise Security Weekly today. Good work you're doing. Fascinating. Getting some insight into this world.
Thank you for having me. Truly an honor to be with you all today.
All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk about a recent APT attack on a U.S. aerospace company with John Dwyer from Binary Defense.